Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm bringing you another reading video. So I have done so much reading so far this year. To put it in perspective, I've already finished my Goodreads 2024 reading challenge. Last year, my challenge was to read 15 books. I only read 10. And this year, my challenge was to read 13 books, and I am on my 14th now. I don't know what got me so hard at the beginning of the year, but I was like on a really big reading binge at the beginning of the year, so because of that, I have a lot of new books to talk about. If you do enjoy videos about reading, I only have one other one on my channel so far, and that one is really fun. I basically recommended a book based on each Taylor Swift album, so you can like pick your favorite album and then there's a book recommendation for you. And I really enjoyed making that video, like going through my list of books and like pairing things up. It was so much fun to do. So if you enjoy reading videos, let me know. I would love to make some more. But in today's video, I'm just gonna go through my 2023 reads, or not 2023, it's 2024. I'm gonna go through my 2024 reads so far in chronological order. I guess I'll try to do spoiler free. If I am gonna say a spoiler, I'll give you a spoiler alert before I say it. But yeah, I also will be rating each of the books out of 5 stars like I do on Goodreads, just giving you my thoughts about each one, whether or not I recommend. And yeah, I also wish that I read paperback books anymore. I almost exclusively listen to audiobooks nowadays, which is unfortunate because I don't have anything to hold up for almost all of these books. So I will put a picture of the cover on the screen. However, I don't own a lot of them physically. So first book that I read in 2024 was The Guest List by Lucy Foley. This is a book that I talked about in my Taylor Swift book recommendations. I really like Lucy Foley. She does really good murder mystery thriller type books. I've read this one and her book The Paris Apartment. I definitely like The Guest List more. Gave it 4 stars on Goodreads. The Guest List is the story of a couple who's having a wedding on a remote island off of the coast of Ireland. It's only accessible by ferry, and while they're there, there's a lot of like crazy weather, and there's a lot of suspense. A lot of the characters' lives become unraveled while they're there, and it's also told from multiple perspectives, which I usually love in a book. So that's a really fun read. It kind of jumps around from person to person, and you don't really know who's telling the truth. It's a really fun book. I find that Lucy Foley writes really great suspense. I do think both of these books that I read by her were a little bit predictable. Like, I feel like I kind of knew what was going to happen by the end. Even though I felt like I could predict what was going to happen, they were still very enjoyable to listen to. Both of the ones that I read had really good audiobook narration, which honestly to me is kind of a make or break thing for an audiobook. Like, if there's a really good narrator, I usually will love it, even if the story was just bleh. Second book of 2024 that I read was Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. This book I gave 3 stars. Only heard about it because I heard about the TV series that was being produced by Reese Witherspoon's studio Hello Sunshine, and I tend to really like stuff that Reese Witherspoon does, so I was interested in reading the book first before I watched the show, and that was really my only motivation for reading the book. I hadn't heard anything about it, didn't know anything about the plot. It's basically the story of 2 mothers. I think it takes place in maybe like the early 90s, I would assume, and it's basically just about both of their families living in this town. One of the families feels like they don't really fit in. The other one, which in the show is Reese Witherspoon's family, is kind of like quintessential perfect picturesque American family. And throughout the book, a lot of the children and the mothers' lives, kind of like what I said before about Guest List, kind of come unraveled. I didn't love this book, and then when I watched the show, I didn't really like the show either. For both of them, I kept feeling like I was waiting for some sort of big reveal or like a dramatic twist to happen that was gonna like really hook me in, and I felt like there just wasn't one. I was always like felt like I was waiting for something, and that thing never materialized for me. So it was kind of like I was waiting to get sucked in the entire time, and then it was over. If you do want to read this book, I am going to say there are a couple books on this list where I would recommend you look up a list of trigger warnings for the book before you read it. This is definitely one of them. It's just good to know going in. The third book that I read this year was The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins, which I gave 3 stars. I mostly wanted to read this book because I was definitely a Hunger Games tween in the early 2010s, and I actually did my cardinal sin, which is I watched the movie for this book before I read the book, which I usually do not do. If I remember correctly, the reason why I did that is because the waiting list on Libby, the app that I used to listen to my audiobooks, was like way long, and the movie was going to be out of movie theaters before I got off the waiting list, so I just saw the movie and then I listened to the audiobook when I got off of the wait list for it. I liked the movie okay. I definitely liked the book more. I think to me the big thing about the book was that the two main characters, Coriolanus and Lucy Gray, I felt like their relationship was so much better in the book. I feel like they had so much more chemistry, and like I understood their relationship and I like believed in it more in the book. I feel like this might be an unpopular opinion, but I really didn't think that the actors in the movie had great chemistry. I said this to somebody when I was seeing the movie. Since I didn't know the story already, since I hadn't read the book, I didn't know that they were supposed to be romantically involved, and I didn't realize until like an hour and a half into the movie probably that they were supposed to be romantically interested in each other and not just like friends, which maybe I was being dumb, but also I feel like I should be able to tell what the relationship between those characters is supposed to be. Anyway, the other thing that I really liked about the book is I felt like Coriolanus's character had so much more depth in the book, and I loved being able to hear his thoughts because he was a very stoic, quiet character on screen, but in the book you could really like see his thought process, which was really interesting. So that one I enjoyed. I would definitely recommend you read if you like Hunger Games. I'm sure if you like Hunger Games you've already read it, but you know, if you're older like me and you're kind of out of that phase, I'd still recommend you read it. It was a good read. The next book that I read this year was The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky, which I gave 5 stars. 5 full stars from me. This is another book that I read because I have seen and loved the movie for many a year. I saw the movie when it first came out, and it has been in like my top 5 favorite movies of all time my entire life. It's the best. And I can't believe I had never read the book until this year. Got it on Libby because the audiobook is only like 5 or 6 hours. It's like really, really short. And I literally listened to it in one day. It was so good. Absolutely adored the book. If you like the movie and you've already seen the movie but you haven't read the book, I'd still recommend you read it because it is a little bit different and they're both very enjoyable in different ways. This is another book that you need to look up trigger warnings for if you're interested in reading, but I loved it. Full 5 stars. It's really, really good. Next book on my list is a little bit of a funnier one. This one I actually do have a physical copy of, and this one I wouldn't actually count towards like my Goodreads goal, but I'm gonna overreach the goal anyway, so it doesn't matter. I reread my favorite childhood book, which is The Sisters Club by McDonald. This is a 5-star book for me. This is the same author who wrote Judy Moody, which was I think her more popular series, but she did write this series called The Sisters Club, which I have all 3 books in the trilogy for. This is a book that I read in my school library when I was in elementary school, and I absolutely fell in love with it. I took it out of the library over and over and over again to read it so many times, and I have a physical copy now. I mean, it's definitely a children's chapter book, but I definitely recommend you read it. You can read it like one day. The Sisters Club is the story of 3 sisters, Alex, Stevie, and Joey, who are from a family of everyone who loves to act. Their parents work at a theater in their town. It's basically mostly from the perspective of Stevie, but it is a multiple perspectives book. You just hear about Stevie, the middle child, trying to keep your family together. I highly recommend if you are a middle sibling to read it because this is like middle sibling core. And yeah, it was my favorite book as a kid. It's still one of my favorite books. It's the best. And I was talking about this with some friends recently. It's one of my life goals to adapt this book into a screenplay in the style of Ramona and Beezus, 2010, starring Selena Gomez and Joey King, because this would make such a good movie. I can't believe they've never made it. I know the Judy Moody movie was not a smash hit, but I believe that the core of this book can be a great movie, so I will be getting on that soon. Next book that I read this year was Carrie, Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is the 4th book that I've read by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I've read the other 3 books in her little series about women in history. This one was definitely my least favorite of that series. I gave it 3 stars. I have to say this book is about a tennis player, very famous tennis player. It takes place in like the 90s. She's trying to have a comeback as an older player in her career, and this book has a lot of tennis in it, and a lot of the time I felt like I was kind of bored by that, but also I wasn't exactly following like the stakes of the book because I don't know that much about tennis. Taylor Jenkins Reid did a good job of trying to explain the rules of tennis without just like giving you a rule book. Just was having a hard time getting invested because of that. The other issue that I had with this book is that I felt like there wasn't really a character to root for. I couldn't tell if the point was that you root for Carrie, who's the main character. She's kind of a nightmare, and I was kind of rooting for her downfall the entire time. So I don't really know what the intention was, but yeah, this was not my favorite. I would recommend that you read some of the other books in this series. My favorite is Daisy Jones and the Six. I'm sure you've also read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, which is really good too. And I also liked Malibu Rising more than this one. I still enjoyed it. Not my favorite. The next thing that I read this year was An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green, which I gave 5 stars. Second, or I guess this is the third 5-star book of the video. This book was such a refreshing read to me. I absolutely loved it. Hank Green, I'm sure you know who he is. He is from Vlogbrothers, brother of John Green, author, host of Crash Course, taught me chemistry and biology, helped me pass those classes in high school, and he wrote 2 novels in this little series. It's kind of a sci-fi story about meeting alien species. I would not usually consider myself somebody that enjoys sci-fi if it's not Star Wars, but I surprisingly was so engulfed in this book. I loved it. I read it in like 2 days, I'm pretty sure. It has really great characters that are so well developed, great stakes, like it's so stressful, it's very well paced, so well written, great tension, and I just love everything that Hank Green does. I'm a big fan. I also waited a really long time to get off of a wait list for it, so I am glad that I finally read it. The next book that I read this year was a little bit of a switch up. I read The Virgin Suicides by, I don't know how to say his name, Jeffrey, okay, I can't find a video of him saying his name. I think it's Jeffrey Eugenides is how I would assume it's pronounced. This book is one that I can't believe I never read like during school or anything. I'm glad that I finally read it. This is another one that's very short. You can read it in a very, like, one day probably. It's a very weird book. It has very interesting characters that were very compelling to me. It's the story of this family of daughters who live in this weird town, and I don't even know what to say about it. It's really weird. It was turned into a movie that I haven't watched yet, but I am hoping to watch. If you're interested in reading this, definitely look up a list of trigger warnings. I don't know what else to say about it. I really enjoyed it. The audiobook that I listened to was fantastic. The narrator was really good. But yeah, this is one that I gave 4 stars. I'm sorry, I feel like I did not say anything academic about that book, but I can't think of anything else to say. The next book that I read this year was Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I unfortunately gave this book 2 stars. It's a fantasy book, and this girl lives in this fantasy world. She goes to a school to learn how to ride a dragon, very Harry Potter-esque in that way, and there's a lot of danger. It's kind of like a cross to me between like Harry Potter and like Divergent, at least in storytelling. And I understand why people like this book. I just have to say, not for me. I don't love fantasy usually. And also, I personally hate reading. This book didn't even really have that much in it, but even the scenes that did have it, I was tweaking. I was like, I can't read this. Especially if you're somebody who listens to audiobooks. It's a lot. It's definitely a lot to take in. Even like the actual story of this book outside of that was not the most compelling, not the most well written to me. Yeah, I kind of like had to put it on like 2 times speed. Like, let me just get through this. If you like fantasy and if you like you might like this book. However, that is just not for me, and that's okay. The next 3 books that I read this year were all 3 books in the Summer I Turned Pretty series by Jenny Han. The first 2 books, The Summer I Turned Pretty and It's Not Summer Without You, I gave 3 stars. The third book, We'll Always Have Summer, I gave 2 stars. I'm sure you know about The Summer I Turned Pretty now. This is something where I watched the first and second season of the TV show before I read the books, which I realize I said at the beginning of this video is like my cardinal sin, which usually it is, but I've done it 3 times in this list so far. That's usually not something that I do. I have to say I love the TV show of these books, and I don't love these books. I was so surprised when I read them how much I felt like the TV show gave so much to the series that wasn't already there, which I feel like is pretty unusual. Like, there are so many things in this show that are not at all in the book. Like, if you've seen the show, the whole debutante storyline is not in the book at all. A lot of the characters from the show are a lot different, and I feel like a lot of the changes they made for the TV series make it flow a lot better. The first 2 books, I was like, these are okay. but the third book actually killed me. I really, really didn't like it. To me, I won't say what specifically I'm talking about because if you're reading it, I don't want to spoil it for you. But it was one of the unfortunate cases of like absolutely mutilating a character that you have built up to be a certain way and then just like actually chopping it up and changing it because you want the plot to go a certain way. And I really don't like when that happens because it feels like, what was all that even for? If you don't know the story of The Summer I Turned Pretty, it's about a girl named Belly who goes to her family friend's summer house at the beach every summer of her entire life. Her family friends have 2 sons, and it's basically just a love triangle over the summer of those 3. Good summer read, perfect beach read, you know. Okay, and then the last book that I've read so far this year has been A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor by Hank Green. This one I gave 4 stars, and this is the sequel to An Absolutely Remarkable Thing that I read earlier this year, and this one just continues the story of all the same characters. This book I liked a little bit less than the first book. The first book had a lot more suspense, action-packed storylines, like it was really like chugging along. This book, when you start it, all of the characters are kind of down in the dumps, and it takes a long time for a lot of them to rebuild and gain momentum for something exciting to happen, which is okay, but I think it was just a little bit less fun to read because of that, but I still really enjoyed it. Love the characters, love Hank Green, very well written, very enjoyable. So those are all the books that I've read so far this year. I will also add a little tidbit about what I'm reading right now as I record this. I am currently listening to Sisterhood Everlasting by Brashares. If you watched my Taylor Swift video, book recommendation video, I recommended the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants series in that video. And if you didn't know, the original Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants series has 4 books in it, and then later Brashares, the author, wrote a 5th kind of epilogue-ish type book that I had never read. And I just started it, and if you haven't read it, I think you need to read it. There are some things that happen in this book that I cannot believe that our queen Brashares would do. I will not go any further than that. It's crazy. Trigger warnings before you read that book. I haven't even finished it yet though. But yeah, those are all the books that I've read so far in 2024. If you have any recommended books for me based on the tastes that I explained in this video, let me know if you have any good ones. I'm always looking for things to add to my TBR list. And if you want to see more reading videos, let me know, because I've been enjoying talking about books. And look at me, little book talk girly. Thank you so much for hanging out and watching this video. I will say, if you are interested in reading content, I do post real-time updates of what I'm reading on my Instagram story all the time. I always post when I start something, and then sometimes I'll do updates in the middle, and I always post when I finish something. I'll do like a mini review on my Instagram story. So if you're interested in more real-time chit-chatty updates like that, definitely follow me over there and on TikTok. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!